Okay, let's talk about a plane that, by all rights, should have been a complete and total failure. Seriously, imagine an aircraft so clunky and overweight that its own pilots made fun of it. It was declared a flop after its first prototype literally crashed and burned. Then, on its very first combat mission, it suffered just catastrophic losses. And yet, this exact same plane went on to sink more enemy warships than any other American aircraft in history. This is the incredible story of the TB Avenger, the ultimate underdog that didn't just win the fight, it completely rewrote the rules of war. And these weren't affectionate nicknames, let me tell you. The pregnant beast, the turkey, that's what skeptical pilots and Navy brass were calling it when they first laid eyes on the TBF Avenger. I mean, look at it. It was the heaviest single-engine aircraft in the world at the time, with this big, barrel-shaped body that just looked like it had no business being in the sky. It was the perfect picture of an underdog, a machine that everybody thought was doomed from the very start. So to really get how this plane pulled off its incredible record, we're going to walk through its entire, unbelievable story. First, we'll look at the seemingly impossible design it had to overcome. Then, its disastrous trial by fire at the Battle of Midway. We'll see how it earned its reputation as a ship killer, and then we'll uncover its secret second life as a submarine hunter. And finally, we'll unpack the lasting legacy of this amazing underdog. All right, so our story really begins with a set of demands that just seemed, well, impossible. It's 1939, and the U.S. Navy knows its main torpedo bomber, the TBD Devastator, is already a flying antique. They needed a replacement, and they needed one yesterday. And what they asked for, well, it would push the absolute limits of aviation engineering at the time. Just look at this list, and you can see the problem, right? These demands actively fight against each other. You want a top speed of 300 miles an hour? Okay, fine. But you also want heavy armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a three-man crew. All of that adds a ton of weight, which, slows a plane down. You want all the torpedoes and bombs carried inside the plane for better aerodynamics? Well, that means you need a massive, complicated internal bomb bay. And the real kicker was this powered electric dorsal turret, a piece of tech that nobody had managed to get working reliably before. It was basically a wish list for a plane that shouldn't even exist. And one of the biggest hurdles was, how do you fit this beast onto an aircraft carrier? The Avenger had a massive 54-foot wingspan. This is where the simple genius of Leroy Grumman himself comes into play. The story goes that he's in a design meeting and he grabs a pink eraser to be the fuselage and a couple of paper clips for the wings. And just by fiddling with them on his desk, he figured out this complex, compound angle that let the wings fold backward and tuck up alongside the body. It was a brilliantly simple solution to a monstrously complicated problem, and it was the key that made the Avenger a carrier plane. But the problems just kept piling up. The final weight, fully loaded, was almost 16,000 pounds. Again, the heaviest single-engine plane on the entire planet. And then, disaster. On November 28, 1941, the very first prototype catches fire during a test flight and is completely destroyed. The critics just pounced on this. They said, see, we told you, it's too complicated, too many systems, too many things that couldn't go wrong. They argued the whole program should be scrapped right then and there. But despite all that criticism, Grumman pushed ahead. And just a few months later, the Avenger would face its first and maybe its most important test, the Battle of Midway. This was the moment where this plane's reputation would be forged in combat, just not in the way anyone expected. The result of that first mission was just brutal. It seemed to prove every single critic right. Out of the 6 brand new Avengers that flew into battle from Midway Island, 5 of them were shot down. 5 out of 6. That's an 83% casualty rate. On paper, it was an absolute, undeniable disaster. But then, they looked at the one plane that made it back. And this is where the entire story flips on its head. The plane was a complete wreck. Engineers found it had been hit by at least 9 cannon shells and more than 60 machine gun bullets. The hydraulics were shot, the electrical system was failing, the turret gunner was killed, the radio man wounded. And yet, this Overcomplicated, too heavy plane soaked up enough damage to destroy 10 normal planes, and it still brought 2 of its crew members home. And suddenly, the light bulb goes on. Navy intelligence looked at that battered survivor and came to the exact opposite conclusion of the critics. All that extra weight from the armor, all that complexity from the backup systems and self-sealing tanks, that wasn't a flaw. That was the entire point. The Avenger wasn't designed to be simple. It was designed to survive, and Midway proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it could do that against impossible odds. Okay, so the plane proved it was tough. Great. But could it fight? With experienced crews and better tactics, the Turkey was about to go on the hunt, and it was going to earn a brand new reputation as the most effective ship killer in the sky. Let's just start with the number 2. That stands for the 2 Yamato-class super battleships, the Masachi and the Yamato. To be clear, these were the largest, most heavily armed battleships ever built. They were floating fortresses that their designers thought were absolutely unsinkable. But, they hadn't counted on the relentless attacks of this so-called pregnant beast. But the Avengers' hunt didn't stop with battleships. Next up, consider the number 12. That's how many enemy aircraft carriers, the heart and soul of the Japanese Navy, the Avenger either sank or helped to sink, from the Ryujo to the Hyo, during what famously became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Avenger just systematically took apart the enemy's naval air power. But this last number is the most staggering of all. Over 1 million. That is the total tonnage of enemy shipping that Avengers sent to the bottom of the ocean. Cruisers, destroyers, supply ships, you name it. To put that in perspective, no other single aircraft in the entire American military came close to that record. The clumsy Turkey had become the most lethal ship killer in the world. But the Avenger story has this whole other incredible chapter. While it was hunting massive ships in the Pacific, it was also secretly becoming the best submarine killer of the war over in the Atlantic. This was a job it was never designed for, but its unique combination of features made it absolutely perfect for it. The tactics they came up with were just devastatingly effective. An Avenger, using its powerful radar, would spot a German U-boat on the surface. It would immediately dive and attack with rockets, forcing the sub to crash dive where it was slow and basically blind. The Avenger would then circle above, dropping these things called sonobuoys, they're basically little floating microphones, to listen for the sub and track it underwater, all while calling in nearby destroyers to come in and finish the job. It was a deadly, systematic process. And the results? Well, they speak for themselves. Avengers flying from American escort carriers were credited with sinking or helping to sink around 35 U-boats in the Atlantic. The plane's incredible range, its huge internal bay that could carry radar equipment and depth charges, and its sheer toughness made it the apex predator in the war on submarines. So, after all these unbelievable achievements, what is the real lesson of the TBF Avenger? Why does a plane built 80 years ago still have something important to teach us? Well, the answer lies in its core design philosophy and how that philosophy had a direct impact on human lives. Let's make this personal. This is the story of a 19-year-old pilot named George H.W. Bush. On a mission in September 1944, his Avenger gets hit by anti-aircraft fire and the engine catches fire. But instead of bailing out right away, he finishes his bombing run on the target and then flies the burning plane back out over the ocean to give his crewmen a better chance of being rescued. Bush survived that day because he was able to control that tough, burning aircraft just long enough to get clear. His life and his entire future was in many ways a direct result of the Avenger's incredible survivability. And this right here perfectly illustrates the central conflict of the Avenger's story. The critics saw a plane that was too heavy, too slow, and way too elaborate. But Grumman, famously known as the Ironworks, they saw things completely differently. What the critics called too heavy, Grumman called robust construction. Too slow was just the price you paid for having redundant systems. Too elaborate was actually versatility. It was a fundamental difference in philosophy. The critics put performance first, while Grumman put survival first. And here it is, the ultimate proof of which philosophy won. Over the entire course of the war, the Avenger had a combat loss rate of just 1.58%. That means for every 100 missions flown, more than 98 of those planes and their crews came home. All that over-engineering, all that extra weight and complexity, it all translated into the single most important metric there is, bringing your people home alive. So this brings us to the final question, the big takeaway for all of us. The story of the Avenger really forces us to ask, when is simplicity actually a weakness? And when is something that seems too complicated really the very thing that gives you the backup systems and the robustness you need to get through a crisis? The Avenger proved that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the one that really works, because it's built for when everything goes wrong. And that's a lesson that goes far, far beyond the battlefield.